Hola a todos. Hoy vamos a hablar del imperativo negativo in español. So today we are going to talk about the negative imperative in Spanish. So we would have previously done the affirmative imperative, and it is worth noting that the link to that video will be found or can be found in the description, okay? So yes, el imperativo negativo. We're going to learn how to form the negative imperative of verbs in Spanish. Now, what you will notice is that it's pretty simple, right? All you need to do is you need to place no before the conjugated verb. Once you remember that, that is half of the job completed, okay? So we place the negative word no before the conjugated verb. And of course, no would mean in this context, do not do something, okay? Because it's negative, right? Now, when I say conjugated verb, you would know that there are different forms of the imperative. You know that we have the familiar singular, you have the formal singular, etc., right? So we're going to look at the formation for each person, okay? So we have two examples here. No comas, do not eat. So this is the two conjugation. And like I said, we're going to get into the conjugation, so don't worry, right? No comas. So you see, we place the no before the conjugated verb. And no hablen, do not speak. I should also point out that you could use nunca, nunca meaning never. That's also a negative word that can be used, right? Because if we wanted to say never do something, then we can't use the affirmative. You have to use the negative because it is a negative, it is an example of a negative imperative, okay? So if I want to tell you never play the piano, I would say nunca toques el piano. Nunca toques el piano. I can't say nunca toca el piano. No, it's negative, right? If I wanted to make that positive or affirmative, I would say, I could tell you, siempre toca el piano. I could tell you that. I could tell you, siempre toca el piano. That's perfectly fine because that's an affirmative sentence, right? But if we put it in negative, nunca toques el piano. Yes, so nunca can also be used as a negative word, right? But the most common word will be no, okay? Now we're going to look at the different conjugations, right? So we start with two, which as you know is the familiar singular. These are persons that you know very well, like your family or friends. So to form the negative imperative of two, the second person singular form of the present subjunctive is used. So you just conjugate the verb according to the second person singular, right? The second person singular, present tense, right? Present subjunctive, I mean, right? And that will be the form that will be used with the negative, right? If you're not really too comfortable with the subjunctive, you could also do this by placing the verb in the second person singular present indicative. So in other words, you can put it in the present tense and then switch the ending of the verb. So for example, if we have an AR verb, we know the second person singular conjugation of an AR verb would end in AS. So we put it in that form and then we switch the ending. So if it's an AR verb, then it has to change to ES, right? Same thing will occur with IR and ER verbs. They go from ES to AS. So that's how we form the imperative for the to form, right? Or the negative imperative. For example, no hables durante la clase. Do not speak during class. As you see, hablar is an AR verb, so we put it in the present tense, okay? and then we change the ending. So we have hables, right? Another example, no bebas el jugo. Do not drink the juice. Beber becomes bebes and ultimately bebas. No bebas el jugo. See? Simple, right? And of course, we have the usual culprits, which would be the irregular verbs. So ser, we have no seas, decir, no digas, hacer, no hagas, ir, no vayas, estar, no estés, poner, no pongas, salir, no salgas, venir, no vengas, tener, no tengas. Okay? An example of an irregular verb in use, no seas bobo. Don't be stupid. Right? I should also point out that in the subjunctive, you know that there are lots of irregular. Well, these are the verbs. There are certain verbs that are very irregular. Then there are other verbs that carry some spelling changes. So in the present tense, you know there are lots of verbs that have radical changes. Some verbs change from E to I. Some go from O to UE, etc. So those changes will apply when it comes to the imperative, right? So I could not this the irregularities that I would have included as well as the spelling changes are by no means exhaustive, right? Because as you know, the present tense in Spanish has lots of changes that can be made to certain verbs, right? So usted, unfamiliar or formal. So to form the negative imperative of usted, the third person singular form of the present subjunctive is used. Once again, if you're not too comfortable with the subjunctive, you can place the verb in the third person singular present indicative and switch the ending of the verb, right? So AR becomes A, change to E. IR or ER becomes E, which changes to A, okay? So for example, no corra, do not run. That comes from the verb correr, and the third person singular present tense is going to be corre. So to put it in the subjunctive, we change the ending, which would be corra. So we get no corra. See, simple, man. Not too difficult. Usual culprits, irregular verbs. Los verbos irregulares. Estar no esté. I remember the accent must be placed on the last E, right? No sea, no de, same thing with dar. You need to include the accent. Decir, no diga, hacer, no haga, ir, no vaya, poner, no ponga, salir, no salga, venir, no venga, and tener, no tenga, right? Example, no venga a la fiesta. Do not come to the party. I would hate to hear that. All right. Nosotros, nosotras. So to form the negative imperative of nosotros or nosotras, the first person plural form of the present subjunctive is used. Once again, we can place the verb in the first person plural present indicative and switch the ending. So AR becomes amos, ultimately changes, and then it ultimately changes to hemos, right? Ir are ER, I mean IR are ER verbs, hemos, they would change to amos because as you know, in the first person plural, for IR verbs, that forms ends in imos, right? But for ER, it ends in emos, right? But in this case, it wouldn't matter because they both would change to amos, okay? So an example, no tomemos esa decisión. Let's not make that decision. That's right. So that comes from the verb tomar. So we get tomamos, tomemos. Usual culprits: no seamos, no digamos, no hagamos, no vayamos, no pongamos, no salgamos, no vengamos, and no tengamos. Example: no digamos la verdad. Let's not tell the truth. Mhm. Vosotros or vosotras. Now, this is, of course, used in Spain, and this would be the second person plural, right? This would be the plural of two, right? In Spain. So to form the negative imperative of vosotros or vosotras, the second person plural form of the present subjunctive is used. Once again, this can also be done by placing the verb in the second person plural present indicative and switching the ending of the verb. So as you know, for vosotros, we are going to have, so AR verbs will change, for this form, AR verbs will end in ice with the tilde on the first A, of course, on the A, right, ice, and that will change to ace with IR and ER verbs, right? So IR will end in is and ER will end in ace, but they both will change to ice. Okay? So for example, no compréis esas entradas. Do not buy those tickets. That comes from the verb comprar. So comprar becomes compráis, and the subjunctive form is going to be compréis. So no compréis esas entradas. Usual culprits: no estéis, and you must remember your accents, right? No estéis, no seáis, no digáis, no hagáis, no vayáis, no pongáis, no salgáis, no vengáis, and no tengáis. Very important that you remember your tildes, right? Example: no tengáis miedo. Do not be afraid. Yep. Ustedes. So we have now ustedes could be for persons that you know or persons that you do not know, right? So it would take the form of being familiar or unfamiliar, right? So to form the negative imperative of ustedes, the third person plural form of the present subjunctive is used. So we can also do this by placing the verb in the third person plural present indicative and switching the ending, right? So AR becomes an, which ultimately becomes N. IR, ER becomes N, which ultimately becomes an. Okay? For example, no vendan la ropa. Don't sell the clothes. That comes from the verb vender, which means to sell, of course. So we have venden, and then we have vendan. No vendan la ropa. Once again, culprits: no sean, no digan, no hagan, no vayan, no pongan, no salgan, no vengan, no tengan. For example, no sean groseros. Don't be rude. Yep. Now let's get into some spelling changes. Like I said, this list is not exhaustive. Okay. So verbs ending in gar, zar, and car will undergo spelling changes in all forms. That should read in all forms, right? That's just a little typo. Right, but I'll deal with that after. So gar verbs will take gu. So we had gu, we have gu followed by the endings. For example, pagar, which means to pay for. We have no pagues, that would be the to form. No pague, that would be the usted. No paguemos, that would be the nosotros. No paguéis, that would be the vosotros, and no paguen, that would be the ustedes, okay? ZAR verbs will take C. For example, empezar, that means to start. No empieces, to. No empiece, usted. No empecemos, nosotros. No empecéis, vosotros. No empiecen, ustedes. CAR verbs will take QU plus the ending. So buscar, which means to search or to look for. No busques, to. No busque, usted. No busquemos, nosotros. No busquéis, vosotros. And no busquen. So no busquéis. You see, see why people avoid the vosotros form? Yeah, it's kind of weird, right? Now, object pronouns. So in the negative imperative, object pronouns occur before the conjugated verb. So remember, with the affirmative, the object pronouns are attached to the conjugated verb. So obviously that's different here, because when we have object pronouns, they go before the conjugated verb, right? And you would also notice not only do they go before the conjugated verb, but they also follow the negative. So they actually fall between the negative word and the conjugated verb. So they fall within the middle. They follow the negative word and then they precede the conjugated verb, okay? So let's look at some examples. Do not look at me. No me mires. So this is directed at someone that you know, because mires would tell you that that is familiar. So that would apply to two. And the object pronoun will be me. Do not give it to her. No silo then. Then tells us that the command is directed at a group of persons, could be familiar or not, doesn't matter, but the command is directed to more than one person, right? So then, ustedes. Celo will be two object pronouns. The se would represent the se would represent the le, which would be her. But remember, when we have two object pronouns in a sentence and the indirect object is the third person, then that becomes se, right? So celo, no celo then, do not give it to her. You don't have to specify a ella if it's already understood by context, right? So no celo then. Let's not buy them. No los compremos. So the compremos will let us know that this is nosotros, and the los is going to be in the object pronoun. So los could replace any object that would be masculine and plural. For example, los zapatos, right? So if I wanted to change to mention the object, I could say, no compremos los zapatos. Let's not buy the shoes, okay? Do not say, no lo digáis. So digáis means that we're talking about vosotros, and the lo, of course, will be the object pronoun. Similarly, when we have reflexive pronouns are going to also occur before the conjugated verb. For example, do not wake up. Note despiertes. Once again, despiertes is going to tell us that we're talking about two, and the te is the reflexive pronoun, right? Let's not stand up. No nos levantemos. Levantemos applies to nosotros, and then nos is the reflexive pronoun. And do not lie down. No se acuesten. Acuesten applies to ustedes, and se will be the reflexive pronoun, okay? So you see that when it comes to pronouns, whether they are object or reflexive, they go before the conjugated verb, but after the negative. So they occur between the no and the conjugated verb. Eso es todo por hoy. Muchas gracias por ver como siempre. Hasta luego.